It's time to talk about liquidating the church. When it's time to dissolve a ministry, honor its legacy with proper financial stewardship. We're unpacking the truth about liquidating the church. Watch the full video on YouTube at Petra Worldwide.
Ladies and gentlemen, the King of Kings is in the house. Warriors, take your positions. And let's get ready to prosper.
Who has more retail locations than Walmart, Target, McDonald's combined? And why are they exiting the American landscape? I wonder if you know the answer. Hi, I'm Nathan Weaver. Welcome to Kingdom's Wealth and Wisdom. Stay with us for this segment. I'm going to answer the question. I'm going to show you why it's important, and I'm going to show you why we should be concerned. Stay tuned. The largest retailer in the world, larger than McDonald's, Walmart, Target combined, is the collective global church. The church has more retail locations, and I am taking some liberties with retail location, obviously, but they have more locations than the largest number of retailers combined. But the question is, why is the church liquidating out of America? The church is literally liquidating itself out of American society. There is a distinct national pattern of churches leveraging real estate to solve their operational deficit. Experts are predicting that as many as 100,000 church-owned properties in the U.S. alone will be sold, repurposed, or closed permanently by 2030. 2030 is only 4 years away. And why is it important? And why do we need to be thinking about this? Well, it's important because let's unpack how they got here. They're trying to resolve an insolvency trap that they find themselves in. Many churches are property rich but cash poor. They sit on valuable land that has been paid off for decades. But now with shrinking congregations, they cannot cover the rising cost of utilities, insurance, maintenance. So they go into a survival mode. Across Florida in the Sun Belt, property values have just skyrocketed, and pastors are increasingly doing a maneuver called a sale-leaseback. These are arrangements where they essentially mortgage or sell the building with the guarantee that they can stay and lease that property back from the buyer for a period of time, hoping that that period of time will give them enough runway to have a turnaround and grow their congregations. But here's the tricky part. The growth in congregation, in-person attendance, is on a steady decline in most of Western culture. It's going to take an act of God to drive people back to the church. Not saying that won't happen, but in the environment we're in today, churches are certainly experiencing a steady decline in in-person attendance. That's not true for every single church. There are outliers that are having a totally different experience. I'm talking about the average in general. Statistics are showing that approximately 4,000 Protestant churches closed in 2024. There were some small home churches planted that should replace, theoretically, the churches that closed, but the ratio of closed versus new plants is a 3-to-1 ratio. And this is a historically dangerous gap for the church. And even when you look at these statistics in regions, the north part of the United States versus the south part of the United States, the east versus the west, the pattern holds true, but it holds true for different reasons. The highest rate of total insolvency in terms of the church, where historic buildings are sold and converted into luxury condos or condominium centers, is a real shift towards religious, what's the right word that I'm trying to think of for it? Just kind of a religious indifference, if you will. In the South and the Caribbean, attendance is stable. Attendance is certainly stable, but inflation has outpaced the giving. Labor, insurance, and materials have risen by 21%, and that makes it hard for even a healthy church to be able to keep up with the rate of operating costs and expenses. The church experiences inflation just like the rest of the world, right? Now, added to that is just the generational differences in how people give. If you go back and you look at attendance stability, where, okay, surprisingly, the attendance from 2025 to 2026, 96% of churches have returned to in-person worship services, where Gen Z is attending at a higher rate than Gen X. But the giving crisis is also impacting them, because if you go back to 1954, churches received 70% of all U.S. charitable donations. That number in 2024 is dropped to 23% because people have more options today. They have a lot more opportunity to give to 501c3 based charities that are in alignment with their values, their goals, and their individual missions, and also serving in their community. So that's something that the church has to think about in terms of the strategy to find themselves in a situation where they can move out of this occurrence. Now, the median congregational income rose 100 to 165,000, but inflation would have required median household income to be 210,000 to have the same spending or purchasing power that it had in 2010. So even the inflation that I just mentioned just has such a significant impact. So what should happen? What happens and what are the solutions? Because the church will liquidate itself out of America if it continues down this path of selling its real estate to fund its operation. If you don't fix the operational revenue problem, you're going to run out of assets to sell. And that's what the predictions are as soon as 2030. 100,000 church-owned buildings being permanently closed, sold, or repurposed in the next 4 years is super significant, and you really have to pay attention. Let me give you a couple of case studies. I'm going to give you case study A and case study B. And case study A is, here's an example of what not to do. Case study B is an example, and these are actual examples pulled from real church situations. But A is, here's probably what you don't want to do. B is probably, here's what will probably be a really good idea. So here's this case. This is a First Covenant church, mid-sized church in a Florida city. We're not getting super specific with who the church is and all of that. Doesn't matter because the pattern is consistent and it happens throughout. The background on this is they were once a thriving 600-member church. They had 50,000 square foot facility on 10 prime acres of real estate. They had debt that was paid off years ago. And most churches are in that spot where their debt, their building has been paid off for many generations. The action they took was they sold 60% of their property, the school wing and the parking lot, to a developer for $4 million in 2024. And they did that to cover their operational deficit and their roof repairs. Kind of the triggering shift, though, was by 2023, weekly attendance had dropped to 110, mostly seniors, and the church school had closed. $250,000 annual cost for insurance, utilities, staffing. And it was stable, but the giving was insufficient. What was the outcome? So they had the background, had a triggering event. Here was the action they took, but let's talk about the outcome, because this was the outcome this year in 2026. So they used the $4 million for operational expenses. They put that money in an endowment, And they added new staff and they added new marketing. So they added staff and they added marketing in an effort to increase attendance, to increase membership. But what happened? Their membership only grew by 15 people. So they've got millions of dollars in marketing and staff making the place look nice, feel nice, trying to deliver an experience that people would enjoy, but membership only grew by 15 people in 2 years. On a pace to be completely insolvent by 2030, they will become a renter in their own legacy. This case study is a real case study, a real church situation, and an example of what not to do, because this is the scenario that's playing out across America. This is literally American churches liquidating themselves out of America. Let's look at case study B. Case study B is more of a successful repurposing. This is social enterprise modeling. And that is very important in terms of a long-term solution, because one thing that the church really has to do is reposition, not the word. The word is the word, and it's never going to change. I'm not suggesting that. But what I am suggesting is the value proposition that the church brings to its community has shifted. It has shifted over the last several generations. And as it shifts, the church has to be more intentional about how it provides services to the communities in which they reside. And this case study is a great example of how that happens. Here's the background. This is a historic church, an older 1920s Gothic style cathedral, 110,000 square feet. It's an absolute landmark in its community. Membership had declined from 1,200 in 1980 to 180 in 2021. They had a crushing annual maintenance budget of $600,000. These big cathedral style churches are expensive to maintain. And all the pastors that are watching this and leading these types of churches, you know how expensive it is to maintain these churches. But they were sitting on $20 million of valuable real estate. Same scenario we saw in case study A. So the triggering shift was they realized mission was no longer filling the sanctuary. Their mission was no longer putting people in the pews on Sunday morning. Listen, with the church having more retail locations than all of the major retailers combined, if your church is open one day a week from 11 to 2 and your mission is to fill your pews full of people, then you're going to experience the same thing. The reality is you have to come to a realization that it's not about filling the pews with people. It's about serving the community. And that was the shift, the focus from internal to external. The mission work is out there. The mission work is out there, not in filling pews. What was the action that they took? They launched a capital campaign to repurpose the underutilized space. They didn't sell it. They didn't sell their real estate. They didn't sell their facility, but they repurposed it. They retained the sanctuary for worship. They leased the 40,000 square foot part of their building for a nonprofit daycare. And they converted the education wing to shared co-working space for a small nonprofit that needed space to grow. And they could serve many nonprofits in that same space. This is a very different action because, again, the key is they didn't sell the real estate. They repurposed the use. Now, here's the beauty in that. Not only did they retain the property, but they created two reliable revenue streams. The daycare lease covered 85% of the facility costs. So now that $600,000 operating budget to just keep the lights on, maintain the building, pay the utilities, pay the insurance, 85% of that was covered by the daycare. The community center and the daycare became feeders for the church, because now you've got co-working space where you've got nonprofit activities happening and people showing up, people engaging. They are still arriving at the church. The daycare is the same scenario. The parents are still experiencing being in the church environment. That creates kind of a feeder in the community where now the church still maintains its position as the anchor of the community, and that's always been the church's position. That's why there's a church on every corner almost in America. Every place you go, you do a 3-mile square radius and you're going to run into several churches, because the church has been the pillar of the community since its founding, and it still can be. We have to rethink how we're doing this. And again, it's not about selling real estate. Now, is there a biblical context for this type of outcome, for this type of action based on a triggering event? The triggering event is nothing more than societal change. Society constantly changes. The needs of the people remain consistent, all right? The word remains consistent, but how it's executed, how it's delivered, constantly changes. So let's talk about where there may be some opportunity to say, is there biblical references that really support this kind of change? And the short answer is absolutely yes, there is. And we have to think about the body of Christ, the body of the church, not thinking about it in silos of denominations, not thinking about it in terms of we worship like this, so we cannot collaborate with this denomination because they worship like that. I'm not talking about significant differences in theology. I'm talking about differences in simple worship styles. And so 2 Corinthians 8:9, different churches came together. They pooled their resources to solve the social crisis of the famine in Jerusalem. This is a biblical blueprint for churches in America today. If there is a crisis in the community where the churches can pull together and serve that need, if the need be education, if it be shelter, if it be feeding, whatever the need is, through a collective effort, even in this scenario, this is a standalone effort, but there's still an opportunity to collaborate to solve the need. 1 Corinthians 12, the body of Christ includes all believers. You can have a Baptist hand, you can have a Methodist foot, all working and functioning as one body. And that's the ultimate goal. Because short of doing that, we will experience the absolute liquidating of the church out of America, because pastors are not paying attention. They're feeling immediate short-term pain, and they're trying to have a solution for that pain. At Petra Worldwide, we specialize in the faith-based community. Our mission is strengthening ministries to transform humanity. If you're a pastor leading a congregation and you need support, you need wisdom, you need someone to partner with you on the financial real estate perspective, visit our website, petraworldwide.org. We'd be happy to speak with you and help you lead your congregation to the community support level it deserves. I'll see you next time. I'm Nathan Weaver, Kingdom's Wealth and Wisdom.